Well, sugar and white flour are two interesting things, and they're some of the worst things you could eat if you have Candida. Both of the sugar and white flour were both created more based on transportation and shipping, because when you strip away the nutrients from the brown sugar and you strip away the protein and the bran from the from the wheat, you end up with white flour, which bugs don't even want to go after. So you can ship it on a train across country and it doesn't go bad. The bugs don't go after it because there's no nutrition. But when a Candida patient eats these things, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire, because the Candida just loves the sugar. It absorbs it like crazy, and then it spreads. And then the person's wondering, gee, why do I get reactions when I eat these certain foods? And eventually they'll figure out it's carbs and sugar, and they go, well, those things are bad. One of the most interesting cases we had was a young man who was developing some kind of collagen disease. It was the doctors had definitely concluded it was autoimmune, and his face was essentially sinking in because the cartilage in his face was being destroyed. So he literally was looking very strange, right? And he came to us because he had researched that Candida could possibly do this. Now, I didn't know anything about this. I was listening to him, and he said, just test me, do whatever you have to do. So he went along and did it, and after about a year, his face had fully come back. The collagen in his face had fully formed back.
We believe that you are strong by design, and you were made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. You're listening to the #1 Strength and Health Authority podcast in the world. So let's get ready to unlock your potential and transform your life in today's episode. Hello there, and welcome to another episode here on the Strong by Design podcast. Your host today, Coach Chris Wilson, and I'm loving this opportunity to be able to host so many terrific conversations here to start the year 2022. We've had just such a nice mix of different topics and guests, and it's been enlightening, certainly, and quite exciting on a lot of levels. And so, this episode goes in a complete different direction from what you've heard the previous few weeks. As you know, on Strong by Design, we like to kind of cover all things body, mind, spirit, which really leaves the door open for just about any conversation affecting the lives of all of our listeners and our fans and followers, people all over the world. And I want to take a quick moment just to say thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We're coming up on 4 years of our show, and just hundreds of thousands of downloads, and just an amazing response. Especially to start the year, too. Really starting off strong. People are hungry for the information that we have on our podcast. And frankly, I think people just love meaningful conversation. And so I'm a bit selfish because I get to have a lot of these conversations, but then I get to at least share it with thousands of people all around the world who I'll never know, which is fantastic. At the end of this episode, I'd encourage you, please hit that 5 stars, leave a short review on any of the platforms that you're listening. We greatly appreciate that. And hit share. It takes just a quick second to share this conversation with maybe a friend or a family member, somebody who would hear this and maybe it would help them in some way. It would give them hope or give them insight into something. These conversations aren't meant to just be for just a few people. We want it to be shared and distributed as best as possible. And so we thank you for sharing it as well. So our guest today, Dr. Michael Biamonte, he is a clinical nutritionist. He is a lot of things, actually. He is the Biamonte Center for Clinical Nutrition. He's the co-creator of BioCybernetics. It's a computer software program that is able to study your blood work and do mineral testing and other things, basically really intricate lab work to determine where your body is imbalanced. And I think a lot of us in life know very little about the inner workings of our body, about what our blood work means, what it says about our overall health and wellness. And I really have a lot of great questions here for Dr. Biamonte. So thank you so much for being on the Strong by Design show today. Happy to have you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
To know a little bit more about you, just because I'm curious and I'm sure our audience is, tell us a little bit more about what got you interested in this area of health. And you can go back as far as you'd like, but maybe give us a brief overview of your professional experience to date.
Well, back in the early 80s, I wanted to go to naturopathic school. And there really weren't that many at that point because essentially Big Pharma and the AMA had wiped most of them out. And but I did find one. I attended. My particular interest was interpretation of testing, particularly blood tests, because I had met a chiropractor whose name was Ken Brockman, who had a unique way of looking at blood work. He could look at the standard blood work that you usually get done at a physical, and he can tell you things nutritionally about yourself and things about the endocrine system, which no other doctors that I ever met or no teacher I ever had was ever able to show me. So when I finally got out of naturopathic school, I decided that I wanted to be able to take the interpretation that Brockman had and put it on a computer. Now this is like in the mid 80s. Computers like a brand new thing, but it struck me that if this was computerized, you could put the person's data in, put their name in and all this, press a button, and the analysis that usually took me 5 or 6 hours to do, the computer could probably do in a few minutes. So I had this idea, and I was working on this, looking for people to help me with this, and I went into a health food store one day and was telling them what I was trying to do, and she said, well, you need to speak to this doctor here in Massapequa on Long Island because he's already got that. So you should go talk to him. His name is Dr. Santoro, and he works for Grumman Aerospace. Wow. So I said, well, that's interesting. So I went and met with Dr. Santoro. We became very fast friends, and he quickly brought me into his circle. He was the man who developed the life support system on the lunar module. Wow. Which, if you guys remember, what the lunar module was, that thing that landed on the moon, the bug-like looking spaceship that landed on. Well, this is the guy who developed the life support systems in there. He was an aerospace physiologist, and he had the same idea that I had. He knew Ken Brockman, and he already had the computer started and rolling. So for like the next 5 or 6 years, I worked with him and his group of cronies there to advance the model. And what we came up with literally was a computer software which was table-driven. There's a specific reason why it was table-driven. And the software is able to take the results of tests that you do on a person and do a simulation of their body, actually run their body based on their tests, so that you could then see where the body, physiologically, where there were errors. And this was all set up especially for nutrition. So it followed the pathway of every vitamin, every mineral, every amino acid, every fatty acid, every nutrient. And then it showed you where there was a breakdown. And as I was saying, it was table-driven. And for the people who know about computers, the reason why it was table-driven is because you're constantly learning new things about the body. And if you don't have a table-driven software, what you have to then do is practically rewrite the entire software every time you want to update it. But if it's table-driven, all you have to do is write the specific logic that you have, the algorithm, and then just stick it wherever it belongs, which makes it very simple to update something.
When you mean
like
table-driven, more like spreadsheet-like. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I worked with them for quite a few years. We were very close to completing this project. And the reason why Grumman was doing this is Grumman had been contracted by NASA to come up with some way of monitoring the astronauts' blood chemistries while they were in the space station for months in order to determine what vitamins they needed. Because they had the idea is they would have these packets and every once in a while shoot up there an update based on the blood chemistries and update them. Because when you're in a weightless environment, you lose a lot of calcium from your bone, you lose a lot of nitrogen, you lose muscle mass. So NASA wanted to make sure they had this handled. and the implications of what we were doing were very broad, because you could take this software and you could analyze a person's biochemistry to the point of understanding why they had the disease that they had. So, to make a long story short, the project was dropped not too far before it was completed, because it was getting too expensive. And it definitely was a point, because we had many doctors contributing to this. We had to pay them hourly for their consulting time. And we even had doctors who we flew in from other parts of the world and then put them up in hotels and whatnot. So I understand that. But they dropped this. It was like many, many hours of work, man hours. And it was a workable, functional model. So when they dropped us, we said, well, what are we supposed to do with this, with the project here? And they said, oh, you guys keep it. Do whatever you want with it. So we started the company BioCybernetics, which bio means biological. Cybernetics is the study of self-regulating mechanisms. So what it actually was, it was a study of the self-regulating mechanism, which is the human body. And we continued to advance the computer well beyond that point, to the point where you could even tell the computer what chiropractic adjustments somebody gets, and they could do an analysis of their body.
It is. And what's amazing is the more I not that long ago was on the other side of Florida. I'm based in the Tampa Clearwater area, but was over at Cape Canaveral, at NASA with my wife and children. And it seems like almost every amazing innovation started with the space program. In the realm of, certainly in the medical field, but in a lot of innovation.
Ever watch Ancient Aliens?
I've heard of that show. I think I've caught a few episodes.
On the History Channel, yes. Ancient Aliens, you'll get a very interesting viewpoint of where a lot of things came from that we're using right now, in terms of their viewpoint is that alien crafts crashed here, and our scientists reverse engineered these crafts to come up with a lot of things that we're using even at this very moment, you and I, right now. So you get a different viewpoint, but definitely, yes, a lot of things from the space program are pretty amazing. It
really is. And so that was catapulted you. Once that program was ended for financial reasons, you just obviously took it. It's like, here, we got this. We know what we're doing. How do we continue down this path? And then you've turned it into, obviously, a very powerful operation at this point. How long have you guys now been? Is this 30 years now? 30 years you've been at this?
Yeah, it's 30 years. The computer it continues to expand, and it's fascinating because when you enter the data in and you get the printout, I mean, the printouts used to be 7 pages long. Now the printouts are in the 30s, and it goes through everything that could possibly be wrong with the person. And what happened to me particularly was we had a certain percentage of people who, when they went on the programs, had strange reactions to the vitamins. So most people went on the programs and it handled their diabetes or their asthma or whatever it was. It just rebalanced their system, so it knocked out whatever was going on that was incorrect. But there was a certain percentage of the people that had strange reactions to the vitamins, and then we found out that they also had strange reactions to medications. So I volunteered to find out what was wrong with these people. And one of the first things I found out is they all had low stomach acid. Their hydrochloric acid levels were low in their stomach. And when that occurs, you just naturally don't tolerate vitamins or medicines because your body can't break them down. So they actually act as a toxin in the body. But the other thing I found out, which was more amazing, is that the reason why all of these people, the primary reason why they had crazy reactions to the vitamins, was because they had candidiasis. And for those of you who don't know what that is, candidiasis is an overgrowth of a fungus in your intestinal tract, which is normally there, but only in small amounts. The fungus is called Candida Albicans. And when Candida Albicans grows to become a more dominant part of your flora, rather than a subdominant part, it does strange things because it releases alcohols into your body. It releases mycotoxins, which are toxins from yeasts and funguses, which adversely affect your nervous system. So then that led me on the pathway of discovering how to handle Candida, because we had all these people coming to us to go on this program, and what was barring them is the fact they had an overgrowth of Candida. So I kept sending them to different doctors, hoping some doctor would be able to cure them, and nobody could. So I took it upon myself then to figure out how to unravel how you handle Candida, and that and what's come from that is my book, The Candida Chronicles, which you can get on Amazon, which explains my journey, my sojourn into understanding Candida and unraveling the mystery of Candida. Why it's a mystery is because Candida causes so many different symptoms. It could cause as much as maybe 150 different symptoms, and it affects everybody differently depending on your genetics. And it's because it's a fungus. It can flip itself. Technically, it's an organism which is called dimorphic, which means two lives. It can switch from a fungus to a yeast, to a fungus to a yeast, back and forth. It's the same organism that causes vaginal yeast infections and jock itch in men, but it's also in the intestinal tract. It becomes a fungus and it causes gas, bloating, all kinds of digestive problems. It can cause asthma. It can cause a condition called leaky gut syndrome, which is known as intestinal permeability, because the organism actually grows roots looking for sugar. So it pierces your own little capillaries in your blood vessels in your intestines, which causes a leaky gut. That allows things that normally would never be allowed to enter your bloodstream to just go right in. And that causes a whole cascade of inflammation. So it's a fascinating organism in what it can do. It's very similar to cancer in a way, because sugar feeds it and makes it multiply. It literally grows into your tissues. It permeates into your tissues. It suppresses your immune system. It's not cancer, but it has very similar properties in terms of how it works.
It increases fatigue, right? It alters mood.
Yeah, when you get Candida, the first thing you'll feel normally is you're sluggish, you're tired, and you start to have cognitive problems. Your memory starts to go. You don't remember things. Then you'll start getting gas, bloating, burping, all types of digestive problems. Then as it continues to go on, you start getting inflammatory problems. You may develop asthma. You develop skin rashes. Then when it comes to the point where you develop the leaky gut, now you become what we used to call a universal reactor, which is somebody who literally can't even leave their house because they react to the pollution. If they go to a party where there's cigarette smoke or perfume, they react to that. They get headaches. They can't walk down the aisle in the supermarket where you have your cleaning solutions. The odors just kill them.
Unbelievable.
And this is when you think about all these different symptoms, also how it affects your reproductive system, because it lowers hormones, it causes infertility, it does all these things. Now, this one organism is causing all of these things. Person has rheumatoid arthritis, they have asthma, they have allergies. You know, if they're a woman, their menstrual cycle is all over the map, and it's all from this one organism, which is just creating chaos in their biochemistry, and it gets overlooked. No one would ever think. So doctors tend to treat all the symptoms in a Candida patient individually, rather than going after what the cause is. That's what makes it fun. Plus the fact that it's highly affected by toxic metals. So if you have a child, let's say, who genetically has the MTHFR gene problems, or he's genetically a bad detoxifier, he gets the vaccinations, right? So he gets thimerosal into his body, which is the mercury preservative that was put in the vaccines that is involved with autism. This kid now develops Candida, and he now has mercury toxicity. So this is why, as we're both shaking our heads, this is why it's such a fascinating study, because it's this one thing that would cause so many different symptoms that always gets overlooked because nobody thinks, because the symptoms are so random.
And it all starts in the gut.
Yes. Well, this is where, as you've been hearing for years now, we've been saying, death begins in the gut, or different sayings.
Well, I've heard people say, and pretty smart people, that all disease begins in the gut.
Yes, and this is why.
There has to be an origin, right, for disease, and at some point, it probably has something to do with what we are putting into our system. What are we putting into our body? on a regular basis that's going to either foster good health or detract from our good health, right? And sugar,
Right.
especially like
Right.
processed sugar. I'm not talking sugars from fruit.
Right.
I'm talking the processed sugar that has been infiltrating our nutrition for better part of 50 to 75 years has absolutely had a huge impact on our longevity and our health.
Well, sugar and white flour are two interesting things, and they're some of the worst things you could eat if you have Candida. But both of the sugar and white flour were both created more based on transportation and shipping, because when you strip away the nutrients from the brown sugar and you strip away the protein and the bran from the from the wheat, you end up with white flour, which bugs don't even want to go after. So you can ship it on a train across country, and it doesn't go bad. The bugs don't go after it because there's no nutrition.
Right. I mean, it tells you something.
But when a Candida patient eats these things, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire, because the Candida just loves the sugar. It absorbs it like crazy, and then it spreads. And then the person's wondering, gee, why do I get reactions when I eat these certain foods? And eventually they'll figure out it's carbs and sugar, and they go, well, those things are bad. I heard on the radio, but why is this happening? And it's because they have an overgrowth of Candida. Now, how you develop an overgrowth of Candida is something has to disturb your intestinal biome. We now call it the biome, which is all the good bacteria in your intestines that's protective, that acts as your first line of defense in your body, which is actually the first part of your immune system.
I was just about to say, it's critical to our immune function. Yeah.
Well, you see this on TV. Everyone now is selling probiotics, which are what we're talking about. That's what the actual substance is. When the probiotics become compromised, the Candida starts to grow out of control. This is what happens. Then it becomes dominant. And anything that would disturb your intestinal bacteria is what will cause Candida. The most common thing that everyone knows about is antibiotics. As most women know, if they take an antibiotic, they could get a vaginal yeast infection. That right there is going right into the lion's den of Candida. But it could be other things. It could be steroids. It could be different hormone preparations. It even could be antacids, Tums, or Xanax, or any kind of antacid. Anything that lowers your stomach acid will also disturb your intestinal flora. Even getting into an accident can cause that because of the shock which occurs on your body. Having dental work can cause it. So there's numerous things that can cause Candida. And for someone to try to figure this out on their own is very difficult. And the testing that exists for Candida isn't always so cut and dry. You have to be somewhat of an expert like me to be able to interpret the test to really see whether the person has Candida or not. That's why I developed a test that I use in my office all the time, which is a test that looks for Candida waste products in your urine. And that's a very reliable test. But it can be very confusing, is the bottom line. There are people who self-treat for years and years. We get patients who come to my office who've been fighting this for 10 years. They've seen at least 10 different doctors, spent thousands of dollars, and they're no close to getting rid of it than they were in the beginning.
Unbelievable. I remember a cousin of mine calling me over a dozen years ago. This is before I had really heard anything about this, about Candida or the implications. And he explained, we must have talked for a few hours, and he was talking about symptoms and doing a lot of reading about what this was. And to me, it was pretty much completely new news. But obviously, it's been around for a bit of time here. It's just that it didn't seem to be getting a lot of press, at least at that point. I mean, this is probably somewhere between 2006 and 2009, but it's obviously quite prevalent.
It is. About 30% of the U.S. population has it at any given time, and it's not going to get a lot of press from mainstream. And there's the major reason why it's not going to get a lot of press from mainstream is because it's caused by doctors. The cause of Candida, for the most part, other than you have someone who gets AIDS or cancer and their immune system becomes suppressed, okay? In the other situations where your immune system is suppressed for other reasons, other illnesses or something else, like if you're if you're mercury toxic, perhaps. If you work in some industry with toxic metals and you get overloaded by the metals or some chemicals, it suppresses your immune system, you could get it, right? That's maybe 20 to 30% of all the cases. The majority of the cases are caused by medications. So you're really not going to get a lot of press from mainstream, because can you imagine the lawsuits you would have? Imagine the people who took Cipro, people who took all these antibiotics, who developed Candida, which caused them 10, 20, 30 years of misery in so many different aspects, wasted time at work. It goes on and on. The lawsuits would be incredible. So it's never going to be acknowledged in that fashion. Functional doctors, alternative doctors, nutritionists, people like that will acknowledge it because they're at the forefront. They're having to treat it and deal with the patients. But mainstream is you're never going to see it on TV. I really doubt it. They're going to see one of those law firms saying, did you take this antibiotic and develop Candida? Well, call us because you're going to be in for a settlement. I don't see that happening.
Wow. Yeah, it's pervasive, yet it's almost like an accepted result of everything else that's already kind of up and running. True. And obviously we're looking at billions and billions of dollars of big pharma and even look, the old food pyramid probably wasn't helping people's approach to Candida either. Making rice and grains and cereals and all the breads and all that stuff are our most important source of nutrients, when it's probably one of the more least important.
This is argued. Yeah, there's a good argument for that. So,
wow.
And you also have GMO food. The other side to the story is that people could actually get Candida from eating excessive amounts of GMO food, which most people in this country do. In Europe, they don't really know what GMO food is because they don't have any. It's banned in Europe. GMO foods have been banned in Europe, and they don't really know what you're talking about. When you go to Italy and you ask the person, is this organic? Is this non-GMO? He's going to look at you like, what are you talking about? He goes, no, that was grown right over there. He's going to point to a hill where this was grown. They don't have the food setup that we have here. So
that's telling.
But nonetheless, Candida is something which a lot of people listening to us right now have and don't know it. But it's the reason why they have all the various symptoms that they have. And the only way to kind of sort it out is if a person wants to try to figure this out on their own, they could say to themselves, well, when did I develop all these symptoms I have? Like draw a timeline of it. And then look to see if prior to that, just prior, they were on any kind of a drug which could cause Candida. Were they on antibiotics? Like a person who took antibiotics and then after that point, within a few months, started to develop asthma or food allergies or constipation or digestive problems, there you can start putting a timeline together and you can put a string together and you can see it's coincidental. It's date coincidental. So that's how someone on their own could figure it out.
So before getting to the point of, okay, I might need to come see Dr. Biamonte, just general blood work, people knowing, what's going on with a blood work somewhere where, that's local to them, or even blood donation, right? You get a kind of a general overview of your health, right? When you donate blood and you get a little blood workup. Right. And there's a lot of people not doing that. Would you say that's at least maybe a good starting point for someone who's like, well, I don't know if I want to go that far, but just getting a kind of a simple blood analysis?
No, that makes it even more mysterious, because what the typical things that when a doctor does a routine blood work for you, when you go for your yearly checkup, he usually does something called an SMA 24 or 26. Which nothing in there is going to test for Candida. In order to test for Candida, you have to go into a lab and you have to ask them specifically, test me for Candida antibodies. And there's usually 3 that they test for, and if any of those antibodies are high, it means your immune system has been fighting Candida. Now, the downside to this is if you've had Candida for a long time, your immune system starts to weaken and the antibodies start to drop. So you could have a raging case of Candida, go in for the blood work, and the antibodies would be normal because they've gone down from being excessively high over the years. Now they're normal, and you wouldn't know.
Wow.
That's why so many people operate based on symptoms when it comes to Candida. Right. And that's also why I developed the test that I did, because I had to have some way around that where in real time I could know what the person's Candida levels are.
Wow. So interesting. So your clinic, are there other places? If people can't get to you, where are you based?
Well, the interesting thing is we only do phone and internet consultations.
Right? Well, there you go.
Yeah, we only do that. I started doing them in 1987, and it's been gradual over the years. It's been more and more phone consultations, and then with the internet, we switched over to the point where that's all we do now. We only do consultations by phone and internet. So we treat people for Candida all over the world. Australia, everywhere.
They just go to their local lab and get blood samples, and then that gets sent to your facility.
Well, actually, it's not blood. What they do is they do urine. They do urine and stool are the two best tests for Candida. And there are a lot of functional labs all over the world that do it. But we developed our own test that the person actually does themselves at home. It's a self-administered home urine test. And the reason why they have to do it at home is because the urine has to be tested within an hour. So it would necessitate the person doing it themselves at home. But that test actually is very interesting because it looks for 3 markers that tell us about the Candida activity, and the test reacts when the Candida dies. And that's a really important thing because there is a phenomena that we call a die-off. When a person takes a medicine that kills Candida, the person feels sick. That's one of the ways you know it's working. And on this urine test, it will react on the test and tell us they're having die-off. So it's not just that they're sick from their normal illness. They're actually sick now from die-off, and that tells us what we're doing is working.
Without naming names, would you be able to share maybe a couple of the most dramatic testimonies or recoveries, if you will, with somebody that was really in a bad situation health-wise and was able to go through, get tested, find out what was going on, and kind of totally 180 their health?
There are 2 stories, and the reason why I would pick these 2 is they really surprised me myself, because we have all the people with chronic fatigue syndrome, which you develop from Candida, people with bad digestion, with all this that have come to us and they've handled that. That's old news. One of the most interesting cases we had was a young man who was developing some kind of collagen disease. It was the doctors had definitely concluded it was autoimmune, and his face was essentially sinking in because the cartilage in his face was being destroyed. So he literally was looking very strange, right? And he came to us because he had researched that Candida could possibly do this. Now, I didn't know anything about this. I was listening to him, and he said, just test me, do whatever you have to do. So he went along and did it, and after about a year, his face had fully come back. The collagen in his face had fully formed back.
Unbelievable.
That to me was unbelievable. Another was a man who had a Japanese strain of Candida, which the name escapes me right now. But this particular strain of Candida would produce so much alcohol that the man was legally intoxicated.
All the time.
All the time. And especially if he would eat bread or eat starch or eat sugar, he would be,
And was and his symptoms were that of someone who was intoxicated? Like he felt like he was
totally
buzzed or drunk.
Totally. Yeah.
His body was
along with the other symptoms
inside.
Yeah. That was another case that even surprised me.
But he was able to be corrected, or?
Oh yeah, it took about 6 months and it was gone. Then we've had patients. Actually, this one patient referred 2 others with the same problem. She called it outgassing, the woman. And what would happen with her is her Candida was so bad that when she was in choir at church, people couldn't be around her because they would smell alcohol. They all accused her of being an alcoholic. And she would admit these smells of alcohol and all kinds of strange things. And the reason why she called it outgassing is because somebody in the choir had looked up at her and she was in the sunlight. And when she was singing, they saw some kind of a mist or some strange thing being admitted into the air from her mouth. That's where she got the term outgassing from.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, these are obviously some extreme cases, but still, I mean, it's amazing that how prevalent. You're saying 30% of people walking around probably have some level of
it at any given time. Yeah, at any given time, just stretching across the timeline, 30% of the U.S. population is going to have it. And the interesting thing is parasites, intestinal parasites, also cause Candida because they disturb your intestinal biome. So if someone goes into a lake or something and they're swimming and that area is infested with giardia or amoebas or something like that, when those parasites get into their intestinal tract, it causes Candida. If you go to Mexico, see, hypothetically, go to Mexico, get Montezuma's Revenge, you'll get Candida. So if we want to bring this down scale, if someone gets food poisoning, after that incident of food poisoning, the acute part of the food poisoning is gone, they could be left with Candida. Because, again, their biome is being disturbed by the food poisoning.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, I mean, geez, I've been on this earth for 46 years, and there's probably been a point where, I mean, even an otherwise healthy person it can experience this, obviously.
Yeah, and some people, their biome resets if you're lucky. If you happen to do all these things correctly, your biome can recover to some degree. When it's a case of Candida to the degree where they would come to me, that generally never happens. You've got to actually interfere to rebalance them. But yes, what you're saying is true. People at times may have experienced it.
So what's the next step for someone listening who's saying, yeah, I mean, I've had, chronic fatigue that's never really been treated or diagnosed properly, or, my joints always hurt. I have a lot of people have skin and fungal. I think my dad had Candida. He always seemed to have either maybe a little bit of his skin irritation, but a lot of the fungal stuff going on with his nails on his hands and his feet. Right. People maybe get a lot of sinus infections, obviously chronic digestive issues or gut issues. We've been talking about all this, the genital or urinary tract infections.
Vaginal and yeast infections, that's the hallmark.
Right. So, I mean, now, obviously, if any of these seem like they're recurring, right, or chronic, then there is a chance, obviously a very good chance, that somebody could be dealing with this. And the first thing they should do is look you up. Should they?
First thing they should do is probably buy my book, The Candida Chronicles, on Amazon, and go through all the symptoms that are listed there. Go through all those symptoms and look at also how it is the person develops Candida. And they may twig. They may say, gee, that's right. I had those tooth pulled. I was on the antibiotics. And then a few months later, I started to notice that I couldn't eat this food anymore or that without having so the person just may twig on it. That's probably the first thing they'd want to do, is just get more had it on it, get more study on it. And then once they're pretty sure, they can contact someone like me. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on the internet. They can look for health-truth.com, which is our main website, or the New York City Candida Doctor, which is one of our other websites. And we can help them wherever they live, because we can have everything done long distance, as I was stating before.
And especially people too who are, I'm not trying to be overly critical, but people who are chronically medicated, right, or on a lot of antibiotics for various things for a lengthy period of time, this is going to have a huge effect on your biome, right, on your gut, on what's happening in the levels of where things are supposed to be.
It literally can take one course of antibiotics, 10 days. And if the person happens to eat the wrong foods during that time, like if the person consumes too much sugar, too much carbs, drinks too much beer during that 10-day period, he can get a whopping case of this. It doesn't have to be as you're depicting. It could be even something smaller. But yes, what you're saying is 100% true. People who are on antibiotics for long periods of time, it's almost impossible for them not to have Candida.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I go back to that conversation I had long before I at that point had been in the fitness business for, about a decade or so, and not really as strong on the nutritional side of things. But it was all news to me. I'm like, wow, I don't read about this. I don't know much about it, but it was firsthand experience from somebody who had dove in to what information was available based on his own experience. And it was a real eye-opener for me. And I remember just thinking about it for days after the conversation.
One of the first books ever written was The Yeast Connection, and that kind of put Candida on the map. So people had the yeast connection. They had a medical doctor who had some credentials, who had a lot of experience with Candida patients. So it gave people some sense that they're not crazy. Because the thing I constantly hear from my patients is everybody thinks I'm crazy. You see? But the yeast connection really didn't prove to be useful in terms of treatment or getting rid of the condition. That took years of unraveling and research, which I dedicated. So I started researching Candida probably in 1988 full time. And it took me about 10 years to totally unwind the riddle. And how I discovered how you really handle Candida and handle it permanently wasn't by studying textbooks. It was by listening to my patients and hearing what they told me went wrong. So when they would tell me, well, I went to the doctor, he did this, this, and this, I felt better for a while, then it came back and I got worse. That's the kind of information I wanted to hear. And then I took that information and then I went to the textbooks to figure out how that could be. I reverse engineered. We talk about reverse engineering. I reverse engineered it to find out what all the things were that went wrong. Now, I'll give you an example of some of them. One of the major things that's wrong with Candida treatments is taking probiotics. People start off taking probiotics. Doesn't work. If taking probiotics cured people of Candida, I'd be golfing. I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have 50, 60, 70 patients a week coming to me for this. The reason why probiotics don't handle it is because when Candida is established, Candida repels the probiotic. It pushes them away. It won't let them stick to your gut lining. You have to eliminate the Candida first and then take the probiotic. So that brings us to the question, how do you do that? Well, you have all these people who they went on nystatin, they went on ketoconazole, they went on these drugs. The Candida went away for a while and then came back. Why? The Candida became drug resistant. It mutated against that drug. And I found out, which is in some of the textbooks I have right behind me, after about 21 days of being exposed to the herb or the drug or whatever it is, Candida begins to mutate and it stops. It's no longer sensitive, or the medication no longer works. So what we do in my practice is we select antifungals for the person based on their tests. We have them switch them around every 4 to 7 days. So they rotate them so that the Candida never gets hit with the same drug long enough to become resistive. We also make sure that people don't take substances that will make the Candida worse. Some of the obvious things are a high-carb diet, sugar, things like that. But vitamins make Candida worse. A lot of people don't know this. I learned this by studying how some of the drugs worked. And what I learned that some of the drugs that kill Candida work by stopping the Candida from being able to absorb iron and vitamin D. I said, wow, so these vitamins affect Candida. These drugs are killing Candida by cutting the Candida's ability to absorb vitamin D from your intestinal tract. So vitamin D can't be good for Candida. Iron, therefore, can't be good for Candida. And then I went through this and I found all the vitamins that would make Candida worse. So we made sure that our patients didn't take those vitamins. Then we looked at all the vitamins that actually act as antidotes against the antifungal, whether it's an herb or a medication. We kept the patient off those. These are some of the discoveries, and there's plenty more you'll read about in my book, because Candida is a little tricky fungus. It has so many surprises and so many tricks that if you don't know all these things, trying to kill it on your own, you'll go crazy.
And have you, or the work that you do, have you been criticized? Have you taken a lot of flap from other professionals, in kind of traditional medicine for kind of the fight against, what's accepted?
You would think that, but not really. And the reason why is because the patients got well. See, the worst thing you could ever do is present something and not be able to back it up. But because the patients came to me with all these illnesses that their own doctor who gave them the antibiotic that caused the Candida, he couldn't handle this. The guy comes to me, he gets better. What's the doctor going to say? Well, it's all in your mind. After a while, that gets thin. That whole line about it's all in your imagination, it's all you. That runs thin after a while, because when the person actually starts getting better, and then they refer 10 other people who come and get better, that doesn't cut it anymore after a while. Who I get slack from is the probiotic company sometimes when I explain what I just explained earlier.
Wow. Yeah, well, it's kind of like anything else, right? You could have a business, let's say small business with 10 people in it. And if you have one person there that's a bit of a cancer, that's not easy to work with or work around, what do? Just hire more good people to offset the bad one? Or do you yank the bad guy out and replace him with a good one, right?
There's a back door. Everywhere there's a back door, and you backdoor them out. You gotta
get them out.
The bad one, because the bad one can cause a lot of confusion. And at the root of every bad condition is one of these people you're talking about.
Well, it's really great, and it's a necessary conversation and a meaningful one. And I think there's a lot of people listening that may or may not have Candida or be dealing with this, but maybe they have some of these symptoms and they've had them for a while and they can't seem to get to the root of the problem, or they haven't sought professional help. And now is a bit of an eye-opener. They should go and grab your book. Again, your book, Dr. Biamonte?
Is the Candida Chronicles. It's available on Amazon, and I'll leave you with a parting thought. We've been finding that the vaccination for COVID and COVID itself can cause Candida. We've had a lot of patients come to us post-COVID who they went through COVID, they went through those symptoms are gone, but they're never quite feeling right. And it's because COVID caused Candida. Same thing with the vaccination. People got vaccinated for COVID, now they have Candida.
How interesting. Wow. Well, it's good to know, and it's worth noting, and I take it from you're a professional who has a lot of insight into this area of health and wellness. And as I said earlier, or about midway through, it seems like just about everything when it comes to our health and our well-being, how we feel, how we function, starts in the gut. It's sometimes also referred to as the second brain, right? And I mean, there's actual direct links between our actual brain and our gut. And they do a lot of talking to each other, let's just say. And so the more optimized you can make both of them, the better off you are. But you got to get to the root cause of things and not do Band-Aid fixes and just deal with symptoms all the time. You got to get down to the root cause.
And unfortunately, our medical profession, even though our medical technology in our country is one of the best in certain ways, it is very symptom-oriented. You can put on the television, and in 20 minutes, you'll hear about all the drugs that handle your symptoms. But we're not, unfortunately, because we don't look at things more the way they do in Europe, where they look at things diet-wise and lifestyle. We're too symptom-oriented in this country. Take this pill, and your symptoms go away. Yeah, but what's causing the symptoms? Don't worry about it. Just take the pill, it goes away. But what's the problem is, whatever's causing that symptom is still down there, churning and burning, and it's going to rear its ugly head with something that's going to be a catastrophe one day if you don't handle it. Well,
so appreciate you, your wisdom, your knowledge here, and your help for these people that that seems like a life-changing thing that is happening for people, where it's truly a 180 of their health when they really don't know where else to turn and don't have the answers. So I encourage people to go check out Candida Chronicles. You can find it on Amazon, as Dr. Biamonte said. You can certainly even visit, the link for the book is on his website. Look at health-truth.com, the Biamonte Center for Clinical Nutrition. Some great reading there and information offered on that website for sure. And then, of course, you're on all the other platforms like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and all the others.
Just like everyone else.
Just like everyone else, right? It can be found anywhere. So, well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed getting to know you and getting to talk about something that really impacts a large percent of the population. So, terrific information.
My pleasure.
And as always, listeners, thank you for joining the Strong by Design podcast. An absolute privilege to be able to speak with experts and professionals, to be able to figure out some things, when it comes to our health and our wellness, our well-being, how we feel, how we're functioning. These are important conversations, and I'm glad you benefited from hearing this today. Please share this conversation with somebody who could benefit from the message. And we'll be coming back next week, as always, here on Strong by Design, another episode, one releasing every single Wednesday. Thanks for joining us, and God bless. Thank you so much for listening to the Strong by Design podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe so that more people can find out about our show. Plus, you don't want to miss any future episodes with the amazing guests and topics we have lined up for you.